I'm speaking really, really scary mean ones.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Forgive me for the distraction. And this is good. This is how you know that it's live. So you
That's
get to
right.
see inside my house. Graham, don't pick the scary ones. Do you hear me? So we're still broadcasting from home as most people are still trying to navigate our social distancing expectations across the country. I want to remind everyone that is listening today that the social distancing requirements and policies and procedures are necessary. Please stay safe, stay healthy, think about others as you think about yourself. Even though we physically are distancing ourselves, it does not mean that we have to stay distant emotionally and spiritually and intellectually. And with that, I am always grateful to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Shana Mashego, tuning in all the way from Washington, D.C. This is, I think, the third time that we've had you on a Teacher Talk, and it's sincerely never enough. Your wisdom and your experience is so insightful and rewarding and inspiring. And so today, we're going to sort of continue some of the conversations that we had with Dr. Mashego a few weeks ago. Specifically, we're talking about this conversation. I want to say dialogue, but I'm using the word conversation intentionally, and we'll get into it. See, I'm already there. I want to say dialogue, but right now it's just conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and particularly what that looks like for racial equality, racial diversity, racial inclusion. Although it needs to be said that this covers a very broad spectrum of what diversity should mean, particularly for educators, people that are tuning in, that are out in the field, whether you're in a community program, after school programs, in public schools, private schools, university, wherever you are. Diversity includes all of our students and colleagues and peers and family members that might fall on the autism spectrum. Those with abilities and disabilities. This is everything. And for me, a shout out to Danielle Wright, a beautiful, incredible musician and friend who I've been engaged with in a book club, an anti-racist book club. And she uses a phrase that I'm trying to adopt in my own vocabulary. She says, I want to learn to appreciate people's human. And she makes this a noun, our human. And I love that idea that the diversity that we have that is blessed to the human population through God's divine will and inspiration is beautiful and needs to be celebrated. But we have turned it into a very negative thing. Humankind has used it to segregate and discriminate. And so how are we navigating this in the educational world? Dr. Mashego actually just published a brilliant article. I loved reading it on LinkedIn, talking about what diversity and inclusion look like, and are we really prepared to do this work? It is work. It is not a singleton workshop that you do. It's not a pamphlet that you hand out. It's not a YouTube video that you watch one time. It is work to be inclusive and to promote diversity and secure diversity in a safe and respectful way. So I saw this post that Dr. Mashego had, and I said, I have to bring her back into Teacher Talk. I'm having these conversations even within my department and my university, and feel very blessed. I actually got elected to serve on our faculty diversity committee. Mm-hmm. So we're dealing with issues of hiring and promotion and what it looks like in analyzing diversity within our curriculum and within our departments and our student body. So this is a conversation of this past week. I feel like I've entered in several times, and I saw the article, and I'll post that in the conversation that Dr. Mashego posted, and I thought I need to reach out to her and see if we can come back and sort of check in, because it's been a while. So there's tons of things she's been doing, tons of things that have been happening. I wanted to we're right at 12:05. I always like to try to give 5 minutes for people to be able to join us. For those that are already watching and for those that might be tuning in later, just a quick preface. So Teacher Talks is sort of an adventure that I started when the pandemic hit in Seattle and shut down our university, Seattle Pacific University. Wanted to find a way to stay connected with my students. And I'm so grateful that this has just sort of blossomed and created this opportunity for me to connect with colleagues and friends all over the world and talk about the arts and education. This Teacher Talk is sponsored by a student organization we have on campus called Feathers. That's Future Educators in the Arts, Transforming Human Experience and Realities. And these are students that are dedicating their future careers to art and education. and are interested in how that can affect us socially and culturally. And so these talks are meant to do just that, to fulfill the design and purpose of the student organization, and hopefully and inspire and encourage others to have these talks and these conversations about the transformative power of the arts in our lives and the significance of what we're doing right now, more so than ever with this tumultuous time we are living through politically and socially and culturally and physically. All the things that we're battling right now. Although too many people feel this to be a cliche, I think the arts are so much a part of the solutions that we're seeking, to be creative and imaginative, to think divergently in these problems. I think the arts really do have so many solutions for us to consider. So that's what Teacher Talks do, engage people in conversations about the arts and education. Again, if you're joining us for the first time, I'm so grateful to have you. We have all of our past episodes uploaded on a playlist on YouTube, and you're welcome to check those out, especially our previous episodes with Dr. Mashego. If you're coming back, I'm so happy to see you. I'd encourage you to participate. There might be 2 people on the screen, but you are always welcome to post comments and questions, and we'll bring those into the conversation whenever we can. Another shout out to Seattle Pacific University for allowing us to have this platform and have these conversations. SPU is a Christian institution of higher ed, so I always like to start these conversations with a brief moment of prayer, moment of reflection. Whatever prayer means to you, however you participate in that, I just encourage you to take this moment to reflect and show our gratefulness for the resources and opportunity that we have to connect. Dear Lord, thank you on this Sabbath day that you give so many of us rest. And I pray for those that are working right now, that are struggling with so many things, God, that you bless them with a peace that surpasses understanding. And that we hold true to this Sabbath day, that we find rest, that we are rejuvenated for the week to come and for the months to come, for the things that you have in store for us. God, bring us closer to you and to your divine will. Thank you for Dr. Mashego. Thank you for the work that she is doing. Thank you for her time and the technology that is bringing us together. We are physically separated, but we are connected spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually. And it is because of the amazing things that you gift us with. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
So Dr. Mashego, how are you doing? What is going on?
I'm doing well, Chris. It is always a pleasure to connect with you. I'm doing well. I'm in the middle of what I'm sure you're in the middle of, and that's lots of conversations. I am, let's see, I'm speaking to you today. I have about another four more meetings this week that are similar to this one, where I have the opportunity just to speak out according to the experiences that I have and the stories that I hear. And as I listen to you explain the concept of diversity and how far-reaching diversity is, I think one of the most interesting things that we have to take into account is, you know, in this country, in America, we've not given ourselves the pure opportunity to celebrate one another's diversity fully, because we're so concentrated upon racism. And because the country was built upon racism as a system, as a way for those on the top of the caste to be able to benefit from those on the bottom of the caste, it's so unfortunate because each one of us brings diversity. The idea that you live in a different state speaks to the diverse kind of culture that you're experiencing in that state. And so the problem that we run into so much of the time is, and I'm not saying that we're choosing, in most cases, those of us, especially those of us who fit toward the bottom of the caste system, we don't choose to have continuous conversations about race. But my goodness, I mean, once you're put in a position where you're judged even before you start to speak, related to parameters that we as anthropologists can't make sense out of in relationship to physical attributes, you're discriminating against a group of people, or you're categorizing people related to their physical attributes. It's one of the most unusual systems of categorization of any culture. And so therefore, the idea that it has to come, this idea of race and racism and American systemic racism and capitalized racism, the fact that it has to be a part of the conversation right now in order for us to move into a place where we're celebrating all of our diverse experiences and skill sets and all of these things, I think is just such an injustice to us as humans, because there's so much to learn and explore about one another apart from physical attributes that have been connected to a caste system.
Yes.
Which is exactly what we have. But now it's important too on the other side of it. And I think a lot of the time it's really easy for those who sit on the top of the caste system, who segregate themselves from other members of the caste system. It's really, really easy to run toward this idea of diversity. Oh, yes, we're going to embrace it. And we're going to really, really think and figure out ways to fully, fully celebrate this idea of diversity and inclusion without getting a clear understanding of what American systemic racism is and what the effects are. So there's a balance, right? So, that was the whole goal of the article that I wrote, because I've been trying to figure out a way to articulate this. All of a sudden, you have all of these institutions and you have all of these schools, universities, and companies that are trying to speedily hire, diversity and inclusion managers and diversity and inclusion personnel, not understanding that there's groundwork that has to be done before those people who have these divergent, beautiful experiences and skill sets, before they're brought into your space, what do you need to do to prepare the ground for them? So it's interesting, Chris. It's an interesting conversation because you have to be willing to look at the ground. You have to be willing to say this ground is not prepared. It has giant rocks and chasms in it, and it's not prepared. And so we need to work with a diversity and inclusion manager, a diversity and inclusion specialist first, to prepare the ground before we start to speak about bringing people in with these diverse colors of skin and diverse experiences. So I'm thinking, at the end of the day, it comes down to this idea of denial and acceptance, right? I believe it's the idea whether you're going to accept the fact that, yes, America has a very sordid past, and many are still unwilling to look at it head on and accept it and understand the kinds of disparities that it has created. Once you're able to do that, then we can move forward into talking about full celebration and inclusion.
And it's fascinating to me. My wife and I are rewatching Downton Abbey, huge Downton Abbey fans.
Okay.
And it's kind of like our release, it's that thing that we just kind of watch it and we don't have to think about it. We've watched the whole series, so we're rewatching it and just it's our entertainment. And as I was watching it and I'm in these conversations, this seems probably like a complete non sequitur, but I promise it's related. So it fascinated me. For anyone that hasn't seen the show, it's set in sort of Victorian England, and it progresses all the way through the 1920s and 30s and into the 40s. And what struck me was, it's talking about this life of the aristocracy and the servants and this incredible hierarchy, that is social hierarchy that exists, and how much prejudice exists for servants compared to the lords and ladies. And it's fascinating to me that this lasted. I mean, it still exists in England to a certain extent, but by and large was still running the country at the turn of the 20th century. And I'm watching it, and what struck me was, here is a country, England, at the turn of the 20th century, was predominantly white, but they found ways to physically identify the different classes of people. And there would constantly be these moments where someone would get hired as a footman and they'd have to wear their livery. And they'd say, you can't go upstairs until you have on livery, because the idea was, if you walk in from the street, you look like anybody. But I need to put you in a uniform, just as you said. So when I see you physically, you have attributes that I can segregate you in my mind and discriminate your place. And there's all of these scenes where Lord Grantham will come down for dinner and he's not wearing white tie, and his mother will get upset because you wear white tie to dinner. Like, even though they're all white and they physically all look the same, they found ways to physically discriminate against each other because they had homogenized race. So how can we separate you to ensure this system survives? And that kind of stuff blows my mind because, of course, in America, with just a horrendous past that we have when it comes to race, we did that exact thing. As the country became more diverse, we no longer said, well, you have to wear a certain thing. We chose skin to be the determining factor. And I bring it up because there is significance to the counter narrative that's happening right now, that people are villainizing America to the extent that we sound like the worst country in the world, and where is our national pride, and America has done good things. And it was interesting because I got into a conversation with someone, I don't know if conversation is the right word because it was on Facebook after I posted something politically charged, but we got into a conversation and immediately they said, what always happens, well, if you don't like this country, you can leave. Yeah. And my response surprised them because I said, what is it that makes you think I don't like my country? Quite the opposite. I'm enamored with what America strives to be. America is absolutely unique in the entire world because it was not founded on a race of people. It was not founded as a country to be distinct culturally. It didn't have a culture. It didn't have a race. Now, by the time the government was founded and it built into its system a caste system of race and segregation, that materialized and was bastardized from some of the original visions of this country. But to look at any other civilized nation, the French are French. And if you're not French, you don't live in France, right? That you're not French. The English are English. Indian people are Indian. Chinese people are Chinese. And if you are not a part of that culture, if you don't have that ethnicity, you are not a part of that nation. I love that America is diverse. I love my country for that, because no other country can say, hey, all of these people from all over the world came in and we are determined to make it work, because it hasn't worked elsewhere in the country. Other countries have failed at taking in refugees, at diversifying their population. French people are still French. English people are still English. Right. Like, there's still segregation. And so I love America for its diversity. What I don't like are the systems that have been built and put into place to negate this hope, this dream for what America can be. And I refuse to say that we have ever been anywhere close to what America aspires to be. That is usually where I lose people in the conversation. I don't hate America.
Right.
But we are not done with racism. We did not solve those problems. We are just now entering into an era where we can really have the conversations. And I want to bring into this, I'm almost hesitant to do it because I'll know I'm going to get worked up, but I want to talk about the executive order that was passed at the end of September. Because what you're doing, I love, is, for me, a political statement. For you to be promoting the idea of diversity training after this executive order is prohibiting people from, I know you've seen it, it's just an atrocity. The line that I can't get over is that, and unfortunately I'm not paraphrasing, is that racism died in this country from the blood that was shed on the battlefield of the Civil War.
Wow.
Which I'm restraining myself to use expletives, but it's just the most ridiculous thing that I think a government body could have published, the executive branch could have published out of the White House in the 21st century. It is just asinine.
I wish I could be shocked. But as a Black woman in America who's living during this particular era and under this particular administration, nothing surprises me anymore. And I think I've gotten to a place to where what can you do other than you just have to constantly play defense? You have to figure out ways continuously to ensure that your story, the story that you've lived, remains relevant and heard. that really is the only defense we have under an administration like this one. And, you know, in my head, I think for me, it's been so unbelievably freeing. Now, for many people, it wouldn't be freeing at all, but I think it's just because of the way that I'm made. I wanted to go back as far as I possibly could to understand the origin of racism against Black skin. When did this start? Because when you look at the history and you look at the anthropological data, you look at the scientific data, you look at all of the sources that I can find, all point to one place. And that place is East Africa. East Africa is the spot on the globe where humanity is said to have begun. And so, you know, it's such an interesting story because when you start to look at this, you know, the way that humanity grew and the way that humanity populated, and then you talk about race. That's why when I speak with my friends who are also anthropologists, we don't even talk about race. We talk about the symptoms and problems and the disparities that race causes, because we've already dismissed the idea of race because it doesn't make any sense scientifically. So as this particular group of this particular species began, as they started to spread related to agricultural needs, they needed land, they needed soil to plant. So they started to move out and migrate to other areas so that for, you know, agriculture, so that they could live off of the land. As they moved into these different places where there were different climates, so their skin lightened or their skin darkened, depending upon where they were in those particular places geographically, and also what kind of diet was prevalent in those spaces. And so depending upon that determined hair texture, that determined skin color, and it determined physical features. But humans, the human race is one. It came out of one place, out of one woman. And we as Christians believe that we have a biblical story that supports that. But as a scientist, as a researcher, I also understand that there is scientific data that supports that claim. East Africa is the home of humans. And so as this move started to occur, just as you explained with the Downton Abbey analogy, this whole idea of separation and discrimination of one another began. And what I've been able to find is there was something called the Arab slave trade. And the Arab slave trade was the idea that Arabs from the northern part of Africa, even further out to what we call now the Middle East, began to enslave sub-Saharan Africans. And they began to take over, fight their empires, take over their empires, and enslave the people that they captured. Now, but slavery related to this particular period of time was very similar to what we'd read about in our biblical text. It was the kind of slavery where you were indentured pretty much for a period of time. It was not chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is only known of in two civilizations, and that's the Egyptians related to the children of Israel and America related to Africans. It's the only two occurrences that we have proof of the concept of chattel slavery, where it was large and prevalent and went on for several years at a time. So,
Shana, would you talk about that? Because you mentioned it in a previous talk for the people that might be watching for the first time. Because I'm willing to admit I was completely oblivious to that. The distinction between being a slave and being an indentured servant and being freed after paying your debt compared to the chattel slavery, which was sincerely eye-opening to me. You had mentioned it in a previous talk, but I think for some people that might be watching, because I was unfamiliar with the distinction.
So chattel slavery is the idea that you are enslaved for life, for the remainder of your life. Chattel slavery is where you are literally seen as property. You are no different than a piece of lawn equipment to your master. So there's a huge difference between the idea of the Arab slave trade, the slavery that occurred in Africa from one empire to another empire. That was not chattel slavery either. That was slavery related to, I'm going to overthrow your empire because I need your land. And so whomever won, whomever remained alive from tribe to tribe became the slave of, or slaves of, that particular empire. But they had property, they were allowed to marry, they had children. In a lot of cases, they became a part of the community that they served. So if you can think of it, it would be the same kind of slavery, when you think of slavery, the same kind of slavery that Jesus would have witnessed as he walked on the soil that he walked on. This idea where it was not, these people were not seen as property. But the Egyptians with the Israelites, they pulled them into a place of bondage that was lifetime, which meant every slave woman who gave birth to a child, that child was forever enslaved. So this idea of chattel slavery was related to the fact that you were the property of your owner. Now, America took on this idea because of what occurred between the Portuguese and the Arabs. So the Portuguese figured out a way to infiltrate the slave trade that was occurring between the Arabs and the sub-Saharan Africans. Due to trade that the Portuguese were doing, legalized trade that was going on, that had been going on for a very long time within sub-Saharan cultures and empires, they figured out that this was a very lucrative business, but the Arabs, they had a hold on this particular industry. And so the Portuguese infiltrated their trade, overthrew the Arab slave trade, and then took over and created the Atlantic slave trade, which brought sub-Saharan Africans to the New World. When they did that, the system of slavery that they created was related to the idea of having cattle or property, and that was called chattel slavery, where these are not humans. Not only are we going to dehumanize them, even before we pull them into a system of slavery, we're going to create a system that dehumanizes them even beforehand. How? Well, because the Arabs had decided that they were easy to overthrow and that they were in turn a bit less human than they were. And so the Portuguese took on this same idea. And of course, they completely magnified the idea because they had to figure out a way to justify the capture and enslavement and inhumane transport of over 12 million Black bodies from sub-Saharan Africa. So therefore, there's all of these intricate details that sit on the inside of the Atlantic slave trade. But to put it all in essence, the whole idea was these are not humans. So therefore, we can see them as property. So therefore, they will be our property for life. And so this idea went on and on and on for many, many years, all the way, of course, up through the Civil War. The Civil War occurs in 1865. Now, even though America, and I want to clarify this because, you get arguments about this all of the time from Americans who refuse to listen to the history or refuse to study the history. America only had about 388,000 slaves transported onto its soil. The other many millions were transported to South America and the islands, right? But by 1860, there were 4 million Black slaves on the American census. So at the end of the day, this idea of the magnification, the population of slaves had grown to such a large number. The Atlantic slave trade was no longer necessary. They already had the kind of human capital that they needed in order to establish themselves as a global superpower with the cotton crop. So the issue is, at the end of the day, when you look at all of it, they took the sub-Saharan African, involuntarily immigrated that body onto the soil in inhumane, barbaric conditions on slave ships, brought them over, put them at the bottom of the caste system, and then forced them to work their fields to create tobacco and other crops, but cotton became king. And so they had to figure out a way to ensure that cotton would remain king, because cotton established America as a whole as a global superpower. That is the issue today. The issue today is we as African Americans built the global identity of America. We established America as a global superpower, but our disparities are still so unbelievably clear that it is unreal that we're having conversations to the effect that racism is an old issue that's been dealt with, that we no longer have to talk about, that we've made reparations for, when there have been no reparations under any circumstances for the African American.
There's so many things that I appreciate about that. And I'm trying to, in most of the conversations that I go in, although people around me would probably disagree with this, I try to be objective. I really do try to be objective. And I recall in high school, I remember one of my AP English teachers had us read excerpts from Mein Kampf. You know, it was like Hitler's sort of manual of like, this is how you start a revolution, right? This is how you start the Nazi party. And I remember us being in that class. And of course, I had this sort of visceral response of like, oh, Hitler and Nazis, like that's horrible. And our teacher, at the time, I really didn't appreciate it. I was way too young to appreciate it. But I remember her saying like, I want you to look past, you know, the fact that it's Hitler, right? I want you to look past that. And I want you to see what it is that he's saying, because there is this diabolical genius of this system that he's promoting and how he came into power. And at the time, I didn't appreciate it. And as I've gotten older, I've started to see, you know, it's not a matter of credit or fame or glory that needs to be given, but it's a part of understanding the system. And exactly as you've articulated, there was this absolutely diabolical genius at play to take these sub-Saharan Africans thousands of miles away from their home to a completely foreign land, separated by thousands of miles of ocean, because there was no hope of escaping. Absolutely no hope. And similarly, I mean, even with the Portuguese and Arab slave trade, you're seeing that, but there's still Moroccan people and Arab people where the, you know, identities can be blurred, you know, as the phrase is, people could pass, that there was a hope of escaping. There was a multicultural, especially within all of the Middle East, you know, when we're thinking about the 18th and 19th century, there's so much diversity and there's so much trade and there's a lot of diversity that's there. So that there's that hope of, at least I know there's still a connection to Africa, that we might be hundreds or thousands of miles away, but there's this hope that exists. But when you take people from one continent to a totally different continent, you start to destroy the hope. You just start to destroy, and I shouldn't even, as you point out, it's not even America that they're taking to South America, that they're taking to the Caribbean. There's no hope of you getting home. There's no hope. So what do? You have to establish new identities and that to me is what I find so atrocious about like the American slave system that was designed, because we have evidence, we have primary sources, manuals and books teaching people how to be slave owners that shows them, don't let them be educated, don't let them write, don't let them talk to each other. You have to completely diminish and destroy any evidence of culture. Don't let them play drums, don't let them sing, don't let them congregate. You have to literally uneducate them. You have to have and unlearning is a thing. They have to unlearn their identity, and we are going to give them this new identity to show them that they are less than and in servitude, and it's all that they should be grateful to have food. They should be grateful to have a place to sleep. That to me is what is so diabolical. Now, can I be objective and say, wow, absolutely, that's diabolical genius. You found a way to get free labor. You found a way to completely cognitively redesign human beings' interpretations of themselves to get them to feel that they were born to be less than. Absolutely, that's diabolical. Is it in any stretch of anyone's imagination at any point in history okay? Absolutely not. And again, I'm fighting expletives right now.
Yeah.
It is in no way okay. So at the point that we could look at it and say, wow, this is horrible that this happened, and this is a system that was put into place over hundreds of years, that this took place and was meant to marginalize and diminish the human dignity of Black people. When we can recognize that, it's like, great, now how do we change it?
Exactly.
And I think that is the real issue. And I have to give a shout out to Dr. Sandra Mayo. Is an extraordinary human being that I have the privilege of working with at Seattle Pacific University. She was just transitioned into a new position. She's a vice provost over inclusive excellence. So she was serving as the vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion on campus. And we've restructured and created this new position. And she's serving in that capacity. And she, it's not even often, she consistently, as you've articulated, points out, this is not about an event. This is not about a book club. This is not about a workshop. No. This is not about training. This is about systemic change. It's not about, oh, but look, we accepted more students of color this year. Great. That's an awesome statistic. But why did we not accept more? And why are we celebrating this? Why is that unique? And why, getting into those, as you say, preparing the ground, getting to the real changes.
Yes. And why do we need to prepare the ground? What happened to the ground?
Yes.
We talk about what happened to the ground so that we can actually, as we're creating change and as we're creating programs and as we're figuring out what we need to do and creating our margins and figuring out what our targets will be, can we talk about what actually occurred? And can we talk about what occurred without politicizing it? Is it possible for us to just look at some facts? It's just amazing that you brought up the idea of the Nazis, because the Nazis studied America's racism system. They studied the American caste system and used a lot of the information to build their caste system. And so Isabel Wilkerson, who is a brilliant writer, gives a clear connection. That is her whole life. She studies caste and this entire thing. And so her book, Caste, is absolutely fantastic at helping us to not only understand what occurred, but the actual effects of what has occurred and how we are living through that today. But Dr. Robin DiAngelo also makes it extremely clear that if you are a white person in America, it is very easy for you to live in such a solid silo that you never, ever, ever have to actually seriously think about the idea of racism.
Yes.
You can create a life for yourself as a white person in this country where you're completely disconnected from the idea of racism. So therefore, when these conversations start to occur, you can just talk about how great America is because the America you live in is great.
Come on.
At the end of the day, the issue that we are faced with over and over and over again, that we should be faced with, is when you know the true history and when you understand it from both a biblical perspective and you understand it from a scientific perspective. We have archaeological data that will back up the fact that we are one race and we are one species. We came from one. We are one humanity. And when you truly understand what that means, and you're able to understand what occurred in America, and then you're able to look at it and say, wait a minute, but we're one race. We treated each other in these barbaric ways and we're all connected. We're all human. Wait a minute, there's something wrong here. Then we can start to move toward change. And it's not enough to just know that either. You have to get a clear understanding of the history. You have to understand what happened in order to be able to create initiatives that are solid and that will actually create authentic change. I have been a victim of cheap diversity. It is ridiculous. It is dehumanizing to be asked to be a part of something or to be a part of an initiative or to be in a space so that someone could check a box off. I've been in that position. It does me no good at all.
And how about this? As have I.
Yes.
It's
yes.
all over the place.
Yes.
It's not a black or white thing. I mean, every disparity, every polarization of culture and society that and I want to use the word, it might not be the right word, but we commercialize it. You know,
yes.
it's about like, oh, we're going to have diversity, so we're going to just celebrate it and we're going to make it this spectacle, and then we're going to move on and never have any change.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's the idea of understanding the true origin story. Who are we really? Who are we really? If we really are one humanity, if we're really one people, then it makes sense for me to celebrate myself in another human. It makes sense for me to see our humanity and to walk that out as an our. And another thing that I want to point out, Chris, which is it's something that I've really come to understand being married to a man who is from Africa, which I count as a privilege. And he knows that he teaches me something new every day. I married my research. It's fantastic. And one of the things that I've come to understand about Georgia's culture is this idea of community. Community is everything to them. Community is everything. Connectedness is everything. So not only as you were describing this idea of there being no hope of freedom, that's one of the other things that was taken. It's this idea of community. Not only did you take it from me when you brought me here and you pulled me away from my people and my languages and my everything, but you also tried to destroy the community that I tried to create once I got onto the soil of America. Even those kinds of communities were discouraged because they were so afraid that Africans would come together and they would overthrow. Right. And so therefore, community was something that was not allowed. So that's another thing that was stripped. But I think that it's really, really easy to get caught up in the idea of all of the disparities that so many groups of people have had to live through. But I think if we're really, really focused upon understanding the problem right now that's facing America, we will look at the group that's been put onto the bottom of the caste system. And that is, we started off as African slaves. So of course we were on the bottom of the system. And we've had to fight for every gain that we have enjoyed. But now we're hearing this alarm being sounded, and that alarm was sounded by the death of George Floyd. That there are still very, very large issues. And when you look at the areas of disparity that are easy to recognize, there are 5 of them. There's economic disparity, there is residential disparity, there's healthcare disparity, there's education disparity, and there's unfair policing. When you look at those 5 areas of disparity that attack and live on the inside of the African American community, what you'll find is one is connected to the other. It's so interesting because what it says is that if I live in a racialized area of disparity, then in most cases that means I probably live in a food desert, which then connects to my health disparity. And then if I live in this area, in this segregated area, then usually that's also going to affect my education, the education that my children are able to acquire. So then the idea of residential is directly connected to healthcare, which is directly connected to education, which then is directly connected to unfair policing, because in most cases, the unfair policing is happening in the neighborhoods and residences of these residential areas that are predominantly Black. And so when you look at it all, it's all connected. And it still remains, even in 2020. And under the current administration, it's become even more magnified and clarified that Americans, there are many, many Americans who refuse to look at it and figure out the why, which is the most important way to eradicate any issue. You have to understand the origin of it. If you don't, you will never fully repair it. It will remain a problem until you can figure out the root and truly understand it. Now, I'm saying, and I've said it several times, it'll take the rest of my life to understand all of the tentacles that are directly connected to the disparities that African Americans experience. I mean, I label myself as one who is a special, I specialize as an ethnic anthropologist. I specialize in the life of the African American, and I'm an ally for Indigenous and people of color. And the reason I label myself that way is because were I to try at the same time, while I'm trying to figure out all of these tentacles and connections related to the disparities of the African American, were I to also try to figure out all of the disparities connected to the Latinx community, I need another lifetime for that. Because that's what caste does. It pulls us into a place where you are to know your place and remain there. I'm going to restrict your body. I'm going to restrict your intellect. I'm going to restrict your opportunities. Why? So that you do not in any way endanger my opportunities. That's the goal. That is how caste systems work.
And there it is.
So therefore, I have to keep you in your place because you just might be really, really, really sharp. And you might in some way push me off of the platform that I've created for myself. So therefore, I have to figure out a way to subject you to a certain position in the caste. And you remain there and I remain where I am. So.
And this is talked about so much in conversation about racial injustice and such, this idea that there is this defense. It's talked about in white fragility. It's talked about, this idea of and I love the way you say it, you can absolutely silo yourself as a white person in America and your life might be fine. And you would never have to deal with the issues that because of technology, because of the media that is now being shoved into your face and it makes you uncomfortable and you don't like it. Well, of course it does. But so many of the arguments, and they have been arguments that I get in with other white people that are upset at a post I put on social media or upset at the rhetoric that I share, they'll say, well, I had to earn my place and I know what it's like to struggle. And I go, but wait a minute. How am I diminishing your experience in any way? I'm not trying to threaten you. I want you to just turn the spotlight off of you.
Yep.
And instead of you celebrating how much you struggled to get what you have, show you how much other people are struggling. I am immediately, in what you said, I kept thinking of the great MLK quote, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it seems like that's what we forget, that it's fine that you're a white person and you're successful and you struggled and pulled yourself up. You pulled myself up on my bootstraps and I earned every dollar I have. Good for you. You know, some people don't have that privilege.
Yeah.
Some people literally can't do that. And that should bother you.
It
should upset you.
It should. Martin Luther King said, you want us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, but you never gave us boots.
Exactly.
Literally, when slavery ended, Chris, there was no post-slavery plan for the African American. There was
there was, but it was a false promise.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, the promises were so thin and completely unsupported. I mean,
well, and I bring it up because that's the counter narrative is that, well, no, with the Emancipation Proclamation, you know, there was land that was promised and it was going to be like, yeah, you bring that up, but it never happened.
It never happened. It never happened. And so the idea of the Great Migration was directly related to the atrocities that occurred after post-Civil War. People could not live their lives in peace. There were so many lynchings and all of these, you know, so the idea of, you know, this, oh, we've done so much and we've made, no, learn what occurred, learn the history, remove your political lens, please, because it does us no good.
Yeah.
It doesn't do me any good, nor does it do you any good. Remove your political lens and look at the history. And that will help you. It will aid you in understanding the behavior and in understanding all of these disparities that are present, many of which were intentional, many of which are intentional. You know, and so that's the idea. If we can look at that, and I would love, love, love to pull myself into a place of blissful ignorance where I'm able to say, you know, hey, I have a doctoral degree and my family, my kids, we're financially stable and all is well. It's well with me. But then I walk out of my house and walk into a business and have someone follow me around the store. And I'm immediately reminded. Or I get a call from my Black son who is Black. He's dark like me. I get a call from him saying, I'm really afraid because tomorrow I have to work the night shift, which means I have to leave my apartment at night, get into my car, drive my car at night to my workplace. I'm afraid. Can you pray for me? That's the reality that we still live in 2020. And it's become even more magnified under the current administration. My dad, who is 86 years old, who lived during that awful period of lynchings that were occurring in southern Louisiana.
Yeah.
He says he's never known this America. He said back then, they told you who they were right to your face.
Yes.
You had to wonder. He says now they wear these masks and then they'll lynch you anyway. They'll lynch you anyway without even blinking. That is the current. My dad, who lived through Jim Crow, said that he does not recognize this America. That's where we are. So I would love to be able to say, oh my gosh, we're in this place where we've moved into, you know, it's Global Diversity Awareness Month. And I love it. I absolutely love it. I work with students from all over the world. I would love it if I could just turn in the fact that I'm a Black woman for one day and just celebrate the fact that we are all uniquely diverse. Just one day of that would be blissful, but I can't do that because every day I'm Black. And at the end of the day, this is the thing. While there are so many different economic variances within white America, within white culture in America, no white person in America has to wake up and live or deal with the fact that they're Black before they're male, or they're Black before they're female. There is a giant difference. And if we can remove our political lenses for a while, or just the chips that we have on our shoulder, or whatever it is that makes us not want to look at the origin story, if we can pull that off just for a while and actually read the history, pick up a Dr. Ibram X. Kendi book, his Stamped from the Beginning book, and get a clear understanding. Some people think that the Civil War, yes, people think that the Civil War occurred and slavery ended. And that is not, Black people were.
I can't hold back anymore. It's a fucking joke, is what
ridiculous.
It is. Like, I just can't.
It deserves fighting to be recognized as human all the way through. I mean, there were all of these political and scientific arguments against a Black person's full intellect.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, this idea of eugenics, the idea of, I mean, there were so many different concepts that were pulled out. Why? To keep Black people restricted and in a space where they could not overthrow the white male who'd created a substantial space for himself in this country and made a decision that I'm at the top and you're at the bottom, and you will be at the bottom and I will remain at the top. And in order for me to remain at the top, you have to remain at the bottom. Why? Once you understand the why, then we can start to create reforms that will actually be authentic, rather than some cheap diversity plan where you don't want Black people in your space anyway.
Yeah.
You know, if you're just inviting us because you feel like we should have a seat at your table, you're saying you own the table.
Exactly.
What's the point of that? We're not interested in that. We're interested in authentic celebration of our skills, our education, and our intellect, just as you are. There's no difference. But before we start to have those conversations, you have to pull yourself into a place of education. You have to understand what happened. How did we get here? But like I said, like D'Angelo says, it's very easy for white Americans to pull themselves into a silo and say, this is the world that I know. What are you trying to tell me? You're trying to say there's something wrong with America? This is the best country in the world. But have you read the history? And do you care? Exactly. Do you care to read the history? Because if you do, then it changes the whole narrative.
One of my favorite activities to witness and to perform around racial injustice is by the extraordinary work of Jane Elliott. She does this many times when she does live events. And I know you've seen this. So she'll ask a group of people, if you would like to be treated like Black people are treated in America, stand up. Yep. And of course, no one stands up. She'll say, I don't think you understood the instructions. If you are okay with being treated the way we treat Black people in this country, then stand up. And of course, the takeaway is, then you know there's a problem.
Yes.
And you're not doing anything about it. And that, I actually got to use that the other day. I'm working with my pre-service music teachers, and I want to bring this in because we started this way because I can't believe we're out of time, but I wanted to bring it because we talked about the importance of diversity, the extraordinary work that you're doing, and being able to, as you put it, to focus in on the Black community as a Black woman, to say, I'm going to look at this, but there's all these other things.
Yes.
We were doing GLSEN, for anyone that's not familiar with it, GLSEN. It's the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. It's an extraordinary organization. They have this thing called the Safe Space Kit. And I was working through this kit with my pre-service music teachers and saying, how do we become allies for all of our students? How do we understand our place of privilege? And how do we look at all of our students in all of these different areas? How do we ensure equity for everyone? And we started talking about race, and we started talking about gender, and we started talking about sexual orientation. We were talking about all these things. And I was able to do that activity with them because we were going through this really nice, again, the Safe Space Kit. I put a link on the YouTube channel to this. It's a wonderful document, and it could be used on any aspect of diversity and inclusion. And it asks you these things. It's called Check Yourself, and it asks you these questions. And so I'm looking at the questions, and I'm talking to them, and it was kind of sneaking in, that, okay, I'm coming from a place of privilege, and here's how I identify myself. And I said, let me do this. And I exactly. And I gave Jane Elliott credit. I said, if you are comfortable being treated the way you have witnessed gay and lesbian and transgender, and if you are comfortable being treated the way the queer community is treated, I want you to stand up right now. And no one stood up. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, let's go further. If you're comfortable being treated the way people of color are treated in this country, I want you to stand up. And no one stood up. And I said, so here's where we are. And how do we move forward? From this moment on, whether you watched this on YouTube or you've seen Jane Elliott do this exercise, and most of the students had actually not seen it, I said, from this moment forward, when we see each other in the hallway, I know that you cannot deny that there's a problem.
Wow.
You have made the decision in this moment that you know that other people are not treated the way that you are treated. And so knowing that, how is every decision that comes after this going to be affected?
Wow.
And you don't have to uproot your life, and you don't have to be unsuccessful, and you don't have to stop pursuing your degree. You don't have to feel guilty for being white. Like, I'm not asking you any of those things, but I do want you to be conscious, as W.E.B. Du Bois talks about the double consciousness, and Maxine Green and Paulo Freire talk about, conscientization and being wide awake. That's the point. We're finally waking up.
Yes.
We're finally becoming conscious of, oh, wow, I have only lived in this one town my whole life, and I don't see the problems because the problems don't exist in my community because we don't let Black people live here.
Yep.
It's not that the problem doesn't exist. It doesn't exist where you are. And start to dig furiously and ferociously to find the root cause of the problems. I want to respect your time. It is never enough time talking.
It's never enough time. And we've got such great, I'm looking at the comments, especially Brandon Beck. Thank you for praying with me. I think he's speaking to when I talked about Miles, that Miles is driving at night and afraid to go to work.
Miles is still a 9-year-old to me. Miles is still just hanging on to your skirt at TSU. And I can't think of this grown man having a night shift.
Yes, he is.
Oh, my Lord.
He is. So I'm grateful. I'm always grateful for the time. And thanks for Joanne and Erica, who got on as well, who, are as Black women who are echoing, yes. I'm sure echoing exactly. I mean, Joanne is married to a wonderful Black male pastor in the Houston area. Erica is married to a Black man and has beautiful Black sons. We live this out. And so I believe, if I could just give a charge,
yes,
I believe each one of us has a fight to fight. Each one of us has a war to fight related to our particular membership inside of the system that America has created. Learn about the place that you've been subjected to. Learn about it, get a clear understanding as to why it's there and why it's been solidified, and then figure out what you can do to fight against it, whatever that particular area is related to who you are. And use your skills and your intellect and your whatever your physical strength, whatever's needed to aid in the fight against this idea of segregation, this idea of American caste, because it does not do us any good. Companies and institutions, universities, that are highly successful, they have very diverse workforces. They have the kind of personnel, for instance, universities. They have faculty, staff, and student bodies that are from everywhere. And when you pull in all of those diverse ideas and you bring in people who have such strong areas of skill in specific places, and you partner them with someone else who has strength in another place, they're bringing in these skills, pulling them together, and showing us what happens when true diversity is at work. It'll change everything, but we have to understand the origin story. We have to understand the history, and then we have to move forward in creating plans that are authentic, truly authentic, that'll pull us together for diversity and inclusion initiatives.
Amen. Amen. There it is. There's nothing more to be said. The charge has been made. It's now time to get out there and do it. I'm stealing the words of my good friend Brandon Beck. Action ideas that preach, reach, and teach.
Amen.
Exactly it. It's exactly it. Shana, as always, thank you so much for your time. I've posted links that they're on the YouTube channel for all of these resources that we talked about, Dr. Wilkerson's book and the GLSEN website and the LinkedIn article that Dr. Mashego posted. So all of those are there. Thank you for those that are watching, and those that might be watching after today's broadcast. Please feel free to reach out to us and get connected with us. We would love to join you and celebrate the work that you're doing in your own community around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as Dr. Mashego said so well, let's go out there. Let's do the work that needs to be done. As always, Shana, thank you so much for your friendship and your incredible wisdom and the work that you're doing. Thank you to everybody that watched. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon for another Teacher Talk.